Are you my daughter? Billionaire asks Black Waitress. What happens next will shock you. What if a single birthmark could change 2 lives forever? Margaret wiped down table 12 for the 3rd time that morning, her worn hands moving in practiced circles across the laminate surface. At 68, she'd been serving coffee and comfort food at Ruby's Diner for nearly 40 years, watching the world change through the window while her own world stayed remarkably the same. The small heart-shaped birthmark on her wrist caught the morning light, the same mark her adoptive mother used to trace gently when Margaret was scared as a little girl. She'd always wondered about her birth family, about the mother who'd given her up in 1956, but those records were sealed tight as a vault. Today felt different though. The elegant, older gentleman in the corner booth hadn't touched his black coffee, just sat there staring at her with tears in his eyes. When she finally approached his table, he whispered words that made her world tilt on its axis. Where are you watching from today? Margaret had seen all kinds of folks come through Ruby's Diner over the years. Truckers grabbing a quick bite, families celebrating little league victories, teenagers on first dates nervously sharing a milkshake. But this distinguished man was different. His expensive suit stood out among the vinyl booths and checkered floor, yet he didn't seem uncomfortable. He'd been coming in every Tuesday morning for 3 weeks now, always ordering black coffee, always sitting in booth 7, always watching her with those kind but haunted eyes. More coffee, hon? Margaret asked, her voice carrying the warm familiarity she used with all her regulars. But when she leaned over to fill his cup, something extraordinary happened. His eyes locked onto the small birthmark on her wrist, and his face went completely white. "Oh my lord," he breathed, his hands trembling as he set down his newspaper. "That mark. Where did you get that mark?" Margaret pulled her arm back instinctively, suddenly self-conscious. "I was born with it, I suppose. My adoptive mother always said it looked like a little heart." "Why do you ask?" The man's name was William Harrison, and as he fumbled for his wallet, Margaret caught a glimpse of something that made her breath catch. Among his credit cards was a small, faded photograph of a baby with the exact same heart-shaped birthmark on her tiny wrist. His hands shook as he showed her the picture, dated December 15, 1956. "I've been searching for 40 years, William whispered, his voice breaking. "My daughter was born that day, and her mother, my wife, she died in childbirth. The baby was so sick, and I was just 22 years old, scared and completely alone. The social worker convinced me she needed specialized care I couldn't provide. I signed those papers thinking it was temporary, thinking I'd get her back when I was ready." Margaret stared at the photograph, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear the diner's usual bustle around them. The resemblance was unmistakable, not just the birthmark, but the same dark eyes, the same stubborn chin she saw in the mirror every morning. The photograph trembled in Margaret's weathered hands as she studied every detail. The tiny baby's face was so familiar yet so foreign, like looking at herself through a time machine. William sat across from her, hope and fear battling in his expression as he waited for her to speak. "December 15, 1956, Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible above the clatter of dishes. That's my birthday." She looked up at this stranger who might be her father, this wealthy man who seemed so different from the working-class world she'd known. "But how can I be sure? How can we be sure?" William's eyes filled with tears as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out another item, a delicate silver locket. "This was your mother's," he said softly. "Isabella. She was wearing it the day you were born. Inside, there's a picture of her holding you just before." His voice trailed off, and Margaret could see the decades of grief etched in the lines around his eyes. She opened the locket with trembling fingers, and there was Isabella, a beautiful young woman with Margaret's same eyes and smile, cradling a tiny baby. On the back of the locket, an inscription read, "For our daughter, with all our love, William and Isabella, December 1956. The diner seemed to fade away around them as Margaret struggled to process this revelation. Here was the family she'd dreamed about through countless lonely nights, the answers to questions that had haunted her entire life. But with those answers came a crushing realization. She'd spent 68 years without them, building a life around their absence. "Why now?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Why did you wait so long to find me? William's face crumpled. I tried, sweetheart. God knows I tried. But the adoption agency closed, records were lost in fires and floods. I hired investigators, spent fortunes trying to trace you. It wasn't until last month that I finally got a lead. A former social worker remembered placing a baby with that distinctive birthmark in this area. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Margaret stared at this man who claimed to be her father, wondering if she was brave enough to believe in miracles at 68 years old. The next few days passed in a blur of conflicted emotions. William had given Margaret his phone number and gently suggested they could arrange for DNA testing to be absolutely certain. She'd tucked his business card into her apron pocket, but hadn't been able to bring herself to call. The possibility of finally having family felt too fragile, too precious to risk losing. Margaret found herself staring at the locket during her breaks, studying Isabella's face and wondering what her life might have been like. She'd been raised by loving adoptive parents, Martha and Joe Patterson, who'd given her everything they could. They'd passed away years ago, but their memory still filled her small apartment with warmth. Would accepting William into her life somehow dishonor their memory? You've been distracted all week, her co-worker Dolores observed, refilling the sugar dispensers beside her. That fancy man's got you all turned around, doesn't he? Margaret sighed, pulling the locket from her pocket. Dolores, what would you do if someone walked into your life claiming to be family you never knew you had? Someone with money and power and a completely different world from yours. Dolores studied the locket thoughtfully. Honey, family ain't about money or power. It's about love and connection. But I can see why you're scared. You've built a good life here, made your own family with all of us at the diner. Sometimes the unknown feels more dangerous than staying put. That evening, Margaret sat in her tiny kitchen, William's business card on the table before her. She'd been independent her whole life, never relying on anyone else for more than friendship. What if he expected her to change, to become someone she wasn't? What if his wealthy lifestyle made him look down on her simple life? But then she remembered the tears in his eyes, the way his hands had shaken when he'd shown her Isabella's picture. This wasn't about money or status. This was about a father who'd spent 40 years grieving the loss of his daughter, never giving up hope of finding her. The phone rang just as she was reaching for it. William's voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. Margaret, I hope I'm not calling too late. I couldn't stop thinking about you. Would you be willing to meet again? Maybe somewhere more private where we can really talk. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. Margaret closed her eyes, feeling the weight of a decision that could change everything she thought she knew about herself. They met at Riverside Park the following Sunday, on a bench overlooking the water where Margaret used to bring her own foster children years ago. William arrived carrying a large manila envelope and wearing jeans and a simple sweater that made him look more like a regular grandfather than a billionaire businessman. I brought everything I have, he said quietly, settling beside her on the bench. Photos of your mother, medical records from when you were born, even the original birth certificate with your footprints on it. His voice was steady now, but Margaret could see the nervous energy in the way he handled the envelope. I also arranged for DNA testing, if you're willing. Not because I doubt. God knows that birthmark and your mother's face staring back at me is proof enough, but because I want you to be completely certain. Margaret took the envelope with trembling hands, and as she opened it, 40 years of questions began finding their answers. There was Isabella, laughing in a hospital bed while holding a tiny baby. William, impossibly young and wearing a soldier's uniform, his face glowing with pride and love. Medical records showing a difficult birth, a premature baby who'd needed weeks of intensive care that the small-town hospital couldn't provide. The social worker told me you needed specialized treatment in the city, William explained, his voice breaking. She said it would be temporary, just until you were stronger and I was better prepared to care for you alone. But when I came back 6 months later, ready to bring you home, the agency said you'd been placed with a family. They wouldn't tell me where, said it was better for everyone if I moved on with my life. Margaret studied a photograph of William in military dress, standing beside a young woman who was unmistakably her birth mother. "You were drafted," she whispered, understanding beginning to dawn. "Korea," he nodded. "I was gone for 2 years. I came back to find my wife dead and my daughter lost to a system I couldn't fight. I've spent every year since then building the resources to find you, to make up for the time we lost." Margaret looked at this man who'd never stopped being her father, even when the world told him to let go. The DNA test results 3 weeks later only confirmed what her heart already knew. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. Margaret realized that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. 3 months later, Margaret stood in William's kitchen, teaching him how to make proper biscuits from scratch. His mansion felt overwhelming at first, but she'd insisted they get to know each other slowly, in small moments that mattered. Today, she was sharing Martha Patterson's recipe, the same biscuits that had comforted her through childhood's scraped knees and teenage heartbreaks. "The secret is not overworking the dough," Margaret explained, watching William's careful hands shape the biscuits with the same gentle precision she'd inherited from him. "My Mama Martha used to say cooking was about love, not perfection." William smiled, flour dusting his expensive shirt. "I wish I could have known them, your parents. From everything you've told me, they sound like wonderful people." They were, Margaret agreed, feeling no conflict now between her two families. "They would have liked you, I think. Especially when they saw how much you love me." Over the past months, they'd built something beautiful together, not trying to recapture the lost years, but creating new memories that honored both their journeys. Margaret still worked at Ruby's Diner because that's where her heart belonged, but now William came in every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday for coffee and conversation. He'd even convinced her to let him help her buy the little house she'd been renting for 20 years. "I have something for you," William said, pulling a small wrapped box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold ring with a small heart-shaped ruby, not expensive or flashy, but meaningful. "It matches your birthmark," he explained. "I had it made to remind you that you've always been loved, even when we couldn't find each other." Margaret slipped the ring onto her finger, next to the simple wedding band from her brief marriage decades ago. "You know what I've learned through all this?" she asked, looking at her father, because that's what he was now, fully and completely. Family isn't just about blood or time spent together. It's about choosing to love each other every single day, no matter what. William pulled her into a gentle hug, and Margaret felt something she'd searched for her entire life. The simple, profound peace of knowing where she came from and where she belonged. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales like this one. Thank you for joining Margaret and William on their journey home to each other.